If we're gonna date, you may have to defeat my 7 evil exes.
I'm talking to you, Scott Pilgrim.
Scott Pilgrim.
We need to play now and loud.
There was a screening of Shaun of the Dead in 2004 at the Raleigh Studios. It must have been, I guess, in the summer of 2004. And the producers, Adam Siegel and Jared LaBeouf, who were producers on Scott Pilgrim, cornered me, and they had a copy of the book, the first book, which was the only one out at the time, Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, Volume 1. And they cornered me and they said, "This is your next movie." And I was like, okay. And their pitch, which was hilarious, because I remember this, because it's also, I think, quite accurate. They said, it's like John Hughes meets Kill Bill. I said, I like that idea. So they gave me the comic, and I mean, they were like half right, because I didn't make it into a movie, but it wasn't my next movie. I made Hot Fuzz next. The thing that I really liked about Scott Pilgrim was the metaphor of the book. Brian had written this book about dating life and relationships, and kind of like sort of having to kind of be mature in relationships was like sort of like a battleground, and sort of charting this journey to being with the woman who you think you're in love with is like a tournament in a martial arts film. And I thought that was really interesting, of the idea of like sort of like fighting for a relationship, dealing with the baggage of a new partner, all of those kind of things that sort of like you deal with in real life, but to do it in a really fantastical way. And then beyond that, I also, having done Shaun of the Dead, and I was already thinking about doing Hot Fuzz at this point, the idea of doing something like Scott Pilgrim that was actually, you know, had some similarities to Spaced, in the sense that it had an opportunity for magical realism and to be really visual in a way that wasn't tethered to kind of like planet Earth, was really interesting to me. So I said I was interested, and then the funny thing that happens like with Hollywood studios is they're like, great, this is his next movie and it's in the trades, and I'm the only one going, hey, do we want to wait until he's written the rest of the series first? And they're like, oh, the attitude sometimes of like execs and studio execs is like, go, let's make it. Well, I was the only person sort of saying like, why don't we wait and see what the rest of the comic is? Like, you know, maybe that would be a false economy just to leap right into it. So during that period, me and Michael Bacall are already talking. Like, I'm talking with Brian the entire time. And me and Michael are just reading what Brian is like writing. And so I think then by the time that we actually were going to start making the movie, there were 3 volumes released, and Brian had written the rough outlines for the other 3, although we didn't exactly follow those outlines, and he didn't exactly make those into the final 3 books. So there was a sort of point where it kind of like naturally diverged. So one of the reasons I think that the movie looks so close to the comic is because we had full access to Brian, and he could literally tell us what locations he had drawn. Sometimes he had the photos.
What is this place?
It's a totally awesome castle. They're shooting this movie here right now.
I went to Toronto several times before we started making it to see Brian and to do location scouts and just to kind of like stay there and get the feel of it. There are not many Hollywood films that are shot in Toronto and are set in Toronto. There's tons of Hollywood films shot in Toronto, dabbling for New York or Boston or like Deep Space or wherever. But it was unusual for there to be a Hollywood movie shooting Toronto for Toronto. And that was a really like huge plus to the production and also to the cast, because I think more than any other film I've done, it did feel like we were sort of living Scott Pilgrim as well as making it. Like the cast were all the age of the characters, and the places that we were hanging out in real life were very close to what the characters in the movie were doing. So it's that thing, like, even though the film is like so fantastical and it has all of these insane kind of fight sequences, it always felt grounded to me, because I thought, well, we're actually filming in the real places that Brian took his inspiration from, whether it's like Casalona or even just like that particular pizza joint. Like, you know, it was like, we're in the real places. Like, I think that was kind of mind-blowing to Brian Lee O'Malley, actually, that we bothered to really shoot the real places.
Can I have your autograph, please?
Michael was the only person that I thought of for Scott Pilgrim. Anybody that was more, and I say this like, it sounds like a sort of a criticism of Michael, but it's not. But anybody who was more obviously studly and macho didn't seem to me like the right thing for Scott Pilgrim. If you'd have cast super fit Zac Efron, it's not quite the same movie because like sort of it would seem like Zac Efron could handle himself in a fight because he's like ridiculously ripped. Whereas it was more funny and more relatable watching somebody like Michael be like this amazing fighter. That to me was inherently funny. So to me, that was the only choice because Michael was hot off SUPERBAD. Like I loved him in Arrested Development. And then obviously SUPERBAD was a massive hit. So then everybody was like, great. And then beyond that, I think there was, it was more like down to me to cast the rest of the movie. And then there were people who were already sort of semi-established, like Chris Evans, had already done Fantastic Four by that point. Jason Schwartzman is obviously like kind of an indie icon in his own right. Anna Kendrick had been in Rocket Science. Aubrey Plaza, though when we cast her, had like done nothing. I think I was the first person to cast her in something in Los Angeles. And then because she'd been cast in Scott Pilgrim, I think then her agents like sort of then she got cast in Parks and Recreation and Funny People immediately afterwards. But she got cast as Scott Pilgrim first. And also Brie Larson had been like a sort of like a child actor and even a teen pop star. But I remember she came in and auditioned against some more established people than her and just like wiped the floor with them. Her audition, if you've ever seen it on the Blu-ray, was just like extraordinary. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I had seen her in Death Proof. I think maybe I even wrote the first draft of Scott Pilgrim in Quentin Tarantino's guest house. I know that sounds like a terrible name drop, but it's true. And around that time was when Grindhouse was coming out. So I had met Mary socially through Quentin. And I remember the night that Grindhouse came out, me and Michael Bacall went to see it at the Chinese. And as we were driving off somewhere afterwards to have a drink, I said, that girl who played the cheerleader, that's Ramona. She looks exactly like the drawing.
Scott Pilgrim!
What did you do with my sister?
I wanted it to feel very kind of surreal, like that it felt a bit like a anime. And in animation, people don't really blink so much. Also, there's a thing like Michael Caine, his school of acting, you know, like page 1 is like, never blink on a close-up. It disempowers you. It makes you look weak. And it's true. It's like, if somebody doesn't know their lines, they're like, you know, like blinking like crazy. So I sort of thought it was a good thing in this because like, you know, if you look at like Brie Larson's performance particularly, she's like so kind of like strong and so unblinking. So we got into this thing of like, sort of like not blinking during takes. And they used to call me the blink Nazi on set. But at the time, you know, when we'd be doing dialogue, like if Brie Larson was doing a take, right before like the take, she'd be like, okay, action.
Let's start with Launchpad McQuack.
That's not the actual title of this.
I'd been friends with Nigel before like Shaun of the Dead and huge fan of his work as well. And there hadn't necessarily been an opportunity to do something with him in a film until Scott Pilgrim came along, and I asked him quite innocently, would you ever be interested in doing a score? And he said yes. In terms of the bands, the idea was that we felt that when there were like other films with like fictional bands, usually it would be the same songwriter and team doing all of them. So like in like say Phantom of the Paradise, which is a film that I absolutely adore, Paul Williams does all the songs and does all the different bands. And whilst there's different styles, they're all like Paul Williams songs. That's not a bad thing, it's great. With this, we thought like, well, it would be interesting to kind of hire different artists to do the different songs, because then it would feel properly diverse. And I remember with Sex Bomb, there were a couple of other bands that we like looked into who were like, maybe, you know, like sort of younger bands like the Black Lips and this band called Be Your Own Pet. who broke up before we could even have a meeting with them. And Nigel was the one who said, you should just ask Beck. Beck would love doing this. It's how he started. I thought maybe Beck wouldn't want to do it because maybe he's Beck, but he like loved it. And then like I told the story before, but it's absolutely true, is that over one weekend, he demoed like 27 songs or something crazy. And by the end of the weekend, I remember like Nigel went down and set him up and was kind of like helping him out. And basically we put artwork all around his studio in his house. And he did it with like an 8-track, and it was just him and one other musician, Brian LeBarton. And so at the end of the weekend, I remember on Sunday night, Nigel texted me and said, hey, we've got something. And then we went round, he had the CD, and then we drove around Los Angeles in the car listening to Sex Bomb. And basically that's the only real work that Beck did on the movie. Because here's the thing, is that the demos that he'd done were exactly the right sound. And Nigel said, why would you finish them any more than this? Because this is what Sex Bomb could do. Sex Bomb wouldn't sound super polished. Why don't we just use these? So we basically worked from those demos. And it's funny, I told Beck the other day, and I said, do you know how many plays the Sex Bomb songs have on Spotify? And he said, no. And he said, it's like sort of theme from Sex Bomb, which was a demo where you just did one take, has like 20 million streams. And he goes, oh, wow. He goes, that's more than some of my proper tracks. And then the other stuff was like that we cast Metric, like the Toronto band, to be Clash of Demon Head, Cornelius, a Japanese artist, genius, to be the Katayanagi twins. Damn the Automator did like a Patel song. And then Broken Social Scene, another amazing Toronto collective, did Crash and the Boys, and they played on the score as well. Like if you ever look at the score credits, Nigel just brought in like, you know, kind of murderer's row of like talent from Broken Social Scene and Beck's band and Supergrass and Air and Kid Koala. There's like, look at the credits of the score, it's ridiculous. I get very nostalgic when I hear Summertime by Sex Bomb, because it's sort of such a Beck song, but it's so kind of like sort of thrown away and yet like perfectly what Sex Bomb could have done. And then like just hearing like Michael and Mark and Alison Pill sing together just takes me like right back.
Wow. I mean, you can't say I don't know how to put in a show, right?
One of the things I really liked about martial arts films from the 70s and 80s particularly, is that the sort of work of like Jackie Chan particularly, and also early John Woo films and the Shaw brothers, they had this kind of structure that was like an MGM musical. And if you watch a sort of Jackie Chan film from like the sort of late 70s through the 80s, you sort of can see that there's like elements where they're sort of kind of got the structure of like a Gene Kelly musical. And so if you're going to make like a musical or a martial arts films, no two fights should be the same. The number of combatants in a fight should be different every time. There should be some new novelty every time, or some kind of new setting or something that makes it interesting. So we sort of had to think of it in those terms, in terms of like the second fight with Lucas Lee isn't really a fight with Lucas Lee. It's like Scott Pilgrim is fighting his henchman, like in a video game, his stuntman. Or like the third fight is a face-off, it's like a sound battle. Or the fourth fight is not really between Scott and the ex, it's mostly between Scott and Ramona, and then Scott gets brought into it. And then the fifth fight is the sort of bands fighting each other at the same time. And then, the final fight is like sort of Scott versus the henchman and then taking on the big boss. So we're sort of constantly trying to sort of mix it up. And I hired Brad Allen, the genius, like fight coordinator and action director. And Brad was the first kind of like Caucasian sort of Western member of Jackie Chan's team. He's from Australia, but had gone to kind of Hong Kong and worked with Jackie in Hong Kong and China. And so the idea of working with Brad was like amazing. I think the cast worked really hard. Obviously there's amazing stunt work by doubles in the movie, but also everybody that's in the fight scenes, Mary, Michael, May, Jason, Ellen, like really worked so hard on those sequences. Probably my fondest memory of the entire shoot was actually before we started filming, was the like stunt training we did every morning. Just working out with the whole cast was really funny. Just like, imagine doing a gym session with like Michael Cera and Jason Schwartzman and Chris Evans and Brandon Routh and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. It was just like, it was very funny.
How's it going back there?
Like a video game, I wanted this thing where whenever there was a connection, like a fist hitting like a target, that there would be, or a foot hitting something, that there would be like a flash, like you get in a video game. So obviously you can add that on later digitally, but it looks a lot better if there's some kind of like light source going off on the set. We ended up having these kind of like light bulbs everywhere that would be set off in a particular order. So it would be like you were going bang, 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 bang. There'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes I'd give the trigger for the light bulbs to like Brad or like Peng Zhang, his other kind of fight coordinator, and sometimes I would do it, and I'd have my own little button, and I'd stand by the monitor going click, 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 trying to do it in time with the hits. It's funny, but it was something like, it's a really great effect that obviously all of those light bulbs are taken out, but you can kind of see like the hits every time. And Michael Cera said that his main memory of the shoot is that, he said like 2 weeks after we wrapped, he said, I still could just hear clicking, the flashing of light bulbs. He said his main memory of the shoot was like, psh, 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 psh. And he just would hear that in his sleep. So at the end of the movie, when Gideon gets, exploded into coins, we stood on top of that pyramid and we literally threw like thousands of like dollars worth of toonies, Canadian currency, down the pyramid. There was one thing I really remember about that as well, was there was one day, Michael Cera was incredibly safety conscious, very, very safety conscious, as you should be if you're doing fight scenes, but like maybe above and beyond. And if he was doing like a scene with the kind of sword like you see behind me, he would have like a short version of the sword and he would be swishing around like with the short version. And then for the effects parts, we would get a stunt double, so bring in the long version and be swishing that around. So Michael's doing this take where he's fighting the henchman in the club, and Michael, who's very conscientious, is saying like, I'm not too close, everybody okay? And they're like, yeah, you can't hurt us. He goes off to get a coffee. We do the take with the long sword, and then in the first take, bang, one of the stuntmen gets hit in the teeth with the long sword and it knocks his teeth out. And the teeth are on the floor, but also on the floor are thousands of coins. So one of my most surreal memories of the shoot is like myself and the entire stunt team looking on this nightclub floor for like 2 front teeth in the middle of a bunch of coins. And the stuntman, and also stuntmans wear these sometimes things like a badge on it. He's standing there like this with the blood coming out, and he's like, and Michael Cera, I remember Michael Cera comes back with his coffee and sees the whole crew like looking around and sees like the stuntman with blood pouring out of his like mouth, and he goes, how's it going, guys? And the stuntman was fine. He got his teeth fixed and stuff. We found the teeth.
What?
A lot of people wanted me to point the finger as a blame at somebody. And I remember I'd always seen other directors do that after a film had not done well, and I'd seen like them say, oh, the release date was wrong, or like the poster was terrible, or like the trailer was terrible. And I always thought it was like not a cool thing to do. Like, sort of, if something like that happens, even if you agree, like you just don't say that. In this particular case, I knew that the marketing people at Universal absolutely loved the movie. And in fact, one of the reasons that we have this new version is because of that. I knew that the film would like sort of find its audience. And so I think maybe if I was naive in any way, I kind of thought like, well, it didn't do so well the first weekend, but like, people like it, maybe it'll stick around. But I guess like, if you're making a big studio film and you're not platforming, there isn't that thing where something like Napoleon Dynamite can play for 40 weeks or whatever, just kind of play and play and play. Like if something's coming out in thousands of screens and it's not like doing so great, it's gonna lose screens. And also I think for my mental health, I had to not read too much into it anyway because I was still like promoting the movie. I was like, as it came out, we were on our way to London and you know, like still had to do a premiere and everything that week. There was two things that happened that I remember really vividly. One is that Michael Moses, who is like now one of the like top dogs at Universal and then was the head of marketing, he was really proud of the movie. He absolutely loved it. And he was working really hard to try and sell it. And it was, at the time, and maybe even now, it was like a tricky sell. Like it's a comic book movie, but it's coming out in the wake of like The Dark Knight and Iron Man. So I'm sure that as much as people maybe love it now, there's also like a portion of the audience who saw that trailer and said, what the hell is that? You know, like seeing the trailer. But there were two things that happened is that Michael Moses on the Monday, I decided like it would not be a good idea to read any of the box office reports. So I avoided like Variety and Deadline and Box Office Mojo that weekend. It's like, why do this to myself? I'm still gonna promote the movie and I'm really proud of it. So I didn't do that. And Michael Moses sent me an email on the Monday morning, which is one of the best emails I've ever received from anybody in the film industry. And all it said was, years, not days, ... And that's all the email said. And I was like, I know exactly what you mean. And I agree, because also most of my favorite movies were not successes when they first came out. Blade Runner or Big Lebowski or The Thing or Big Trouble in Little China, to name like 4, there's like tons of them. And then the second thing I remember really vividly, nearly all of the cast were in London for the UK premiere. And, you know, occasionally interviews would ask us, how do you feel about how it did this weekend and stuff? And the night before the UK premiere, I thought that I should have like a pep talk to the cast. But before we went out onto the red carpet, I'd get them all together at the hotel, we'd have a drink, and I was gonna give this speech and I was gonna say, hey, listen guys, you know, the film didn't do very well this weekend, but like, I'm really proud of it and I know you're proud of it too. So let's go out and like sort of have a great time tonight because like, I know this film's gonna find an audience. So I had this whole speech worked out because I thought the cast would be all like as bummed out as I was. And then we booked this room, all the cast came down and the cast were just like having a whale of a time, like seemed completely unconcerned with all that stuff. And I remember saying to my producer, I said, they're fine. and I never gave the speech. Now, normally, if a studio film does not do well, usually the creators and the cast run for the hills and like just kind of brush it under the carpet and, you know, never mention it ever again. But we were proud of the movie and we knew that the people who were watching it were really loving it. So I guess we just kind of carried on as if nothing had happened. And that was our way of dealing with it. And in a weird way, by just kind of like sort of force of will, it's almost like you hypnotize people into thinking that it did do well.
No, why would I get fat?
Bread makes you fat.
Bread makes you fat?
I mean, the most famous one and the most quoted one would be obviously like bread makes you fat is the most quoted one. But there's little tiny lines in it that are so sort of subtle that I always forget that they're in there. And then when I watch it again, it really cracks me up. And there's one tiny line in it it's a bit of ADR where Michael Cera sees Roxy upside down and he gets up and he goes, girl from earlier?
Girl from earlier?
That just makes me laugh every time. And it's just such a tiny line and it's so stupid, but that makes me laugh a lot. I guess probably my favorite Easter egg is the Katayanagi twins. The Katayanagi twins they're the Japanese artists and they turn their amp up to the Japanese for 11 as a little Spinal Tap reference. I don't know if there's anything that's new to me as I made it more when you watch films again and you haven't watched them for a while. I felt the same when I rewatched Spaced recently, and I felt it when I was rewatching Scott Pilgrim. I watched it with my editor, Paul Matchless, who was one of the 2 editors on the movie, and has done my recent film, Last October. And I sat there afterwards and I was thinking, I just said, how the fuck did we make that? So it's not so much of something that you feel new about, it's more like sort of you have to think like, wait, I don't understand how we made that movie. This is the thing. There are films that made like 5 times more money than Scott Pilgrim, maybe in that same calendar year. that have never graced a big screen ever again. And Scott Pilgrim, some of those prints from 2010 are still doing the rounds. It's almost that way. It's the nice thing is that now we have this new, like, sort of amazing and looking and sounding Dolby Cinema version. Is like sort of like to put, like, you know, the brand spanking new version into circulation.
You guys are so amazing.